It's so interesting that you just explained this to us because like 2 weeks ago I was in Brazil and I actually did a Portuguese course, and it was the very first time that I heard about this differentiation about brincar and jogar.
Yeah.
And then the teacher was not able to really explain the difference. So it's so nice that I just learned it 2 weeks after.
Yeah. Great.
It's amazing because I also have not encountered it in any of the languages before that I know so far.
Yeah, I
That was
never
the first.
heard of but in general, yeah, I didn't really hear about this difference. Maybe there's like multiple words to say the meaning of play, but the
Yeah.
meaning of play keeps being the same. It's just maybe some
Yeah.
synonyms. So these minute differences are often very difficult to find, and it's very interesting to see. I do
Yeah.
have something that I'm very interested in kind of getting to know more, because you mentioned that you, with this knowledge, this is forbidden Portuguese knowledge, you managed to connect with some other like people that are researchers and familiar with your work. And that's very interesting because 9 times out of 10, even I can see it with my own family that also do research as well, like academic settings can always feel like they're creating some invisible barriers of
Yeah.
knowledge that you cannot access. Like my dad has to learn English and he's maybe struggling, and there's so many resources and talented people out there that don't speak English. These invisible barriers can be a little bit taxing. So I would like to ask you, like, how would you navigate these sort of barriers in the most efficient way?
Yeah. So I need to give a bit of context of the work that I do, and then to answer this question, because I develop a field, a philosophical perspective called childism, along with other philosophers and social scientists globally, and it's like feminism, but from the point of view of children and childhood. Now, why, as the field develops, right? This is exactly the barrier that me and also my colleagues are aware, that will just create also hierarchies, because those who have English will be able to, develop the fields and the theories, but others will not be able to contribute unless they have the same knowledge. So what we have a global network called the Childism Institute, and one of the things, especially since last year, that I have consciously started doing as the co-director in this network is creating language specific spaces within our network. So we have had conversation series on, let's say, a specific topic like adult centrism, adult domination in children's worlds or in education and so on. And then I got in touch with colleagues, because I noticed also the colleagues who had been publishing in a special issue that I had co-edited. They wrote in English, some of them, but they had knowledge of different languages. And luckily, I also worked with a journal based in Brazil, Childhood and Philosophy, which is open to multilingualism. So they do publish in different languages as well, and that's rare. So I'm lucky to meet like-minded colleagues as well. So we developed a language series, a conversation series, and each part of the series was in a different language, and that allowed different groups of people to come together and discuss it. So we had it in Portuguese, German, Spanish, Italian, and now I wasn't the one talking in these because I'm not that fluent, but I could use my language to bring them together. To connect the Italian group together, for example, to connect the French colleagues together. And these spaces evolved. And now we also have different discussion groups. We have one reading group in Italian, we have a reading group in Portuguese, we have one that uses Spanish and Portuguese, which is focused on Latin American contexts. And, we have an English one, of course, but we're very conscious of developing these spaces. And then, of course, what I realize as I do this is, turns out sometimes, oh, there's a colleague who speaks in French but also knows German. So maybe they can also come and address the German group. Oh, there's a colleague from Italy but also speaks French. So then you discover that there are people who speak more languages, and we are consciously forming bridges basically through this.
one thing that I think is interesting for people that would like to join these sort of spaces is that sometimes they are interested in joining a space for a different language, but they would like to contribute, like in other languages as well, maybe because they are very passionate about their own academic, but sometimes they may not have the confidence to contribute in any way. So and you can be a very good example on how this is not a thing, because you often work with languages without necessarily being a native speaker. So how do you decide yourself, like whenever there's these spaces that get created, when maybe understanding, mediating, or even listening can have a meaningful significance, and you can participate to conversation even without actually communicating directly?
So I think here what is important to maybe acknowledge is that communication is, especially in the academic space, is not only if you speak in a room at a certain time. Communication is not just talking and verbal. Communication can also happen like, so I'm not that, I'm not fluent, or when I, even though I contribute to creating the spaces, when I enter it, I'm very nervous and I can't maybe speak or express. Right. So, and in these spaces, you also need like a very fluent level, so when the Italian academics get together or the French academics get together, and it's like, even though I brought them together, now I can't speak. But it does. Then I ask myself, okay, what is the capacity that I'm most like comfortable in? So if listening is my way of engaging and being present, that is the faculty that takes kind of becomes part of, let's say, that connection or that relating. And then I'll listen carefully, I'll make notes, I'll go maybe like look at something they might have referenced which could be important, and then I will include that in my writing, and maybe it's published at some other point, or maybe I will use that and pass it on to someone else who might find it interesting, and they could write it, or I might meet a student from France who was writing, and that also often happens. I get students who come from either Spain or Italy or France, and then I'd be like, there is this reference in your language, you might like look at it. And so I'm still part of that ecosystem, even though I'm not in that room, I didn't speak or I didn't talk, but I'm still connecting and I'm still present. And in one case, my listening helps me, and then in another moment, the listening will help me to find what I need to read, and I can express myself in another language, but I still carried the knowledge from one language into another.
Absolutely. And when you're carrying knowledge from one language into the other, often it's also not about translating the words, but more about translating the ideas. So it would be interesting for us to know, what have you learned about how meaning can shift when you switch languages?
Yeah, it does shift, but also I think what I notice is sometimes, for example, there might be people who speak the same language, but their intentions or ideas are completely different, So even though they speak the same language, they don't have the basic ground that is needed for communication, which is your connection to the topic. Yeah. So I don't know if you brought someone who, let's say there are two people who speak German, but one is really into football and another one is really into classical music. Even though they speak German, they don't really have the same interest. And what is binding them, apart from the grammars and so on. So their communication and connection won't go too far. But now if you put the German speaker who loves, I don't know, classical music, with an Italian speaker who also loves like classical music, they might actually know a lot of references. And even though their abilities in that language might not, be mutually good, but they have the topic, which adds to a shared language, So this is the important. You have to share meaning. If you share meaning and if you share intention, then the shifting languages will not be a barrier. you'll find ways to cross that. However, with childism, for example, which is it's a new word, right? So it's not a word. So we're creating theory. We are creating a new language. And one of the things that we are going to be spending a lot of years on, I guess, is just discussing how is this going to be translated into different language. So, should we one of the examples is like, I think when I wrote something that was translated to German, I said childism should be childismus. And I have a German colleague who says, no, it shouldn't be childismus. And then I'm like, okay, but you translate feminism as feminismus. So why are you don't say weiblichismus, but why can't you keep the word child? But we need to have these discussions, because what is the word child in that language? Shouldn't it become an ism like this? And does the word child in that language have a different meaning than the one in another language? And so we need to negotiate these, how this translation is going to happen, should it happen. And that's why we need communities that will come together, that also keep the dialogue going in their own languages.
I would love to know from you what's your take on this German translation of this concept, because if you were to ask me the question how to translate childism in Italian, I would say, oh, bambinismo. That's easy. I don't have to think. I don't even know if there are more than one ways to translate this. But what's your opinion? Maybe if you have some
Yeah.
nugget of